In this assignment, we need to implement a bunch of methods on words. So let's take out our sheet of paper again and just try some of them out. So the first method was called swap at. We take some word. I'll take hello. And now when we swap it at a particular value here, let's say we swap it at n equals 3, then the index is stored at 0. Then what we're supposed to do is take this string and put it first, and then take this string and put it second. So each of those will be obtained by some call to a substring. And now we just need to find out what are the right indexes. So the first string would be substring starting at index 3 and then going all the way to the end. If you go all the way to the end, you don't have to supply the second index. The second one here will be a call to substring. We start at 0, and then we want to include the 2, but we don't want the 3. And the way substring works is you have to supply the first index that you don't want. So that's when n equals 3. So in general, it's easy enough to see that instead of the 3 here, we can just use whatever n is. And that's the implementation. So if you look over here, we take text.substring of n, and then the text string of text.substring from 0 to n. And that's exactly what we have here. Just in general, I like to come up with a specific example, and then, like here, the hello, and then substitute the 3 with the n. It makes it easier than thinking about it completely abstractly. So let's look at the next one, swap first and last letter. So I might as well just use hello again. And so now I want to take this substring, and this substring, and rearrange them differently so that one goes over here, and this one goes over here, and the other one stays in the middle. So it's again calling substring 3 times, and we need to figure out with what indexes. So this one here is substring from 0 to 1. That's always true for the first letter. This one here is substring from, in my case, it's, let me write the index value so I can see them. It's from 4 to 5. 5 is the first one that I don't want. And then this one would be substring from 1 to 4. Well, now, what do we do in general? Let me just introduce a variable and say that n is the length of the string. Then you can see that this 4 here must be n minus 1. This one here should be n minus 1, and this should be n. Now let's see whether this makes sense. To take the last one, we go from the length minus 1, because that's the last valid position, up to the first one that we don't want, the first invalid position, that's n, or the length. So that does make sense in general. And looking at the code here, I've put text.length into n just because it's awkward to always write that long text.length thing. And then you can see here the 3 substrings rearranged in this way. Now moving on to the next one. Let's again start with hello, and if n is 1, we want to remove the first letter from the back. So let's write down that n is 1 in this case. And in this case here, when we count them from the back, this one is position 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Whereas when we count them from the front, let me do those in green. Those are the actual index positions. So we need to extract two substrings again. Everything before the letter to be removed and everything after the letter to be removed. And again, our challenge is just to find out what are the positions of these substrings. The first substring goes from 0, from the beginning. Now in this case it goes up to 2, and we'll have to figure out what the general formula is in a minute. And the second substring here goes from 4 to the end, and so we don't have to specify that. All right, so now how do we find out the 2 here? What we really need to come to grips with is the relationship between the indexes in yellow and the ones in green. And so what you can see, if I were to call this position here M, for the sake of the argument, that's the index in green. Let me write it in green. Then you can see that M is always 4 minus n, or it's always, in general, the length of the string minus 1 minus n. All right, that's much more useful. So, oh, by the way, I'm messed up here, right? The substring here should go from 0 to 3 because I don't want to include the 3. So you can then see that this index here is always going to be M, and that makes sense because the one that I cut out is the first one that I don't want to include, and this one here is always going to be M plus 1. And now we know how to compute M out of n using the general formula here, so now we can put it together, and you see that here. Here I've called this thing index instead of M, but it's the same idea. So introducing some of these helper variables does make your code easier to develop and also easier to debug. Now finally, the middle letter, there was a different trick to that had to do with the fact that we're not yet allowed to use if statements. Now this will be the last assignment where that's an issue, but it's actually an interesting way to test algorithmic savvy. So let's look at an example with a string of odd length and another one with even length. And so in this case here, we want to extract the substring that goes oh, I should put my little green letters again. That goes from 2 to 3. That's this one. Over here, we want to pick out these 2 letters, and that's the substring from 2 to 4. So our challenge is to get these numbers. So in this case, in the first case here, if n is the length of the string, that was 5. Over here, it was 6. So now we need to have some value that for both 5 and 6 gives us the number 2 as the middle position. And so if you think about it, what you can do is you can take n plus 1, where n was the length, and divide by 2. If n was 5, then n plus 1 over 2 is, I guess that's not working, right? Let's try n minus 1. If n is 5, then n minus 1 is 4 over 2 is 2. That's good. Now watch it for 6. Then n minus 1 is 5, and 5 over 2, That's 2.5, but we throw away the remainder, so that's also 2. So that gives us the starting index. Now the ending index is either 3 or 4, and you'll get that by computing n over 2 plus 1, I believe. Let's just try it out. If n is 5, n over 2 is 2, because the remainder gets thrown away, and that plus 1 is 3. If n is 6, then n over 2 is 3 plus 1 is 4. And so those two formulas will work. Once you've tried an odd and an even one and they work, then there's a good chance they'll always work, because they're generally the right shape, right? You divide by 2, and then you munch something with a plus or minus 1. So how do you do this kind of stuff in general? Really, what I've done is I've tried out a couple of things, and as you've seen, I've made a mistake and then recovered from that. Let's look at the code. And you see here, again, I've given symbolic names to these here, and then I use them in the solution. And that's all.